Thanks to everyone that attended the Educators SA webinar, or actually caught up with it online. It was great to take that time to have a conversation with Rod and share that with you. On the day, we had a few questions that we didn't get the time to address, so I thought I'd take a bit of time now. Deanne asked about what I meant by the off-ramp when I was talking in the webinar, and that perhaps all ages need to understand what that means. I mean, really, Deanne, I like that as a metaphor because there's always, of course, a danger of us getting stuck in a particular situation, whatever that might be. And I was particularly thinking about students who find themselves educationally disadvantaged or disadvantaged through training or other things. And then I think in the conversation we were talking about the high youth unemployment that we're also worried about as a consequence of the impact of COVID. And so students can get trapped in that unemployment. And so, of course, what we want to make sure is that they've got the skills, the capabilities, the dispositions, that if they do find themselves unemployed, because a significant proportion of them will, if they do find themselves unemployed, that they do have the learning to learn skills, they do have the agency, they do have that, that they don't get isolated, they do have a feeling of belonging, and that they can be part of the workforce, part of the economy, as well as part of society. And so I'm really thinking about what are the skills, what's the knowledge, what are the dispositions that students do need to have, that even if they find themselves unemployed, they can get off that track and onto another track. At the moment, we focus quite a lot, and of course quite rightly, on students getting what they need for their transition and for their future, so the learning that they might need to go to university, the skills that they might need to get an apprenticeship, the skills that they might need to go into the employment of their choice or even start up their own business. But if that doesn't happen for them, let's make sure that they've got those skills and dispositions that are going to help them to get off, to build the off-ramp onto another track. Jane asked about how far along is the renewal of the PLP and the research project, and when there might be changes coming to those areas. Certainly using the research project as the spearhead in this area, and we're not kind of building the whole research project and then putting it out there. We're trying to work in a much more agile way with a bit of co-construction with the field. And so what that means is the new PLP is likely to have a range of options for students, and one of those options will be a kind of entrepreneurial option, a kind of personal agency, getting something done sort of option. And we're working on that right now. As I say, we've been working with some critical friends to try that out, to try out some of those ideas. We've been we're in the process of broadening that out a little bit more and working that up and making sure that it's going to work for a range of schools, getting feedback all the time from the field. As that's developing, PLP is starting to come in behind that now. Starting to think about even the national agenda and things like the Sheargold Review of Senior Secondary Pathways, and what that means. How do we connect the PLP to the learner profile and capability? So all that work's going on now. We certainly intend this to be in place in 2023. Now, whether it's in place as a total replacement for the research project, or whether it's in place alongside there's the old research project and perhaps a new research project for a little while. I think we'll have to wait and see, and just see how people are feeling about the new research project as it grows and develops and you find out a little bit more about it. But 2023, I think, is the place where you'll start to see it being available for teaching in schools. Vanessa asked a question about how do we plan for teachers and schools to capture and record capabilities over the student learning journey. Vanessa, I think that's a great question, right? And of course, in South Australia, the Curriculum and Assessment Authority, SACE Board, is only responsible for years 11 and 12. And so we can only have our direct impact in that area. We want to make sure that, we have capabilities already embedded within the subjects. We want to kind of bring that to the fore over time. And so we can take out evidence of the capabilities from the subjects that students are doing and put them together over here so that students can say to employers, universities, others, they can see for themselves, where they are, how much evidence they've got towards those capabilities. Also interested in the medium term about thinking how that comes out of vocational education as well. How do we get the evidence out of that? If we're talking about the mechanism, working on that at the moment, and I think there's going to be some national work on that as well, and we're keen to see how we might connect with that. And so again, that's the mechanism for it is up for grabs. Probably some kind of technology solution, but I definitely don't want the technology to drive the project. I want the education to drive that work and that project. You know, in South Australia and the Northern Territory, educators are already fantastic at looking at a standard, and a progression is not a standard, but looking at a standard and looking at a piece of work and saying, well, on balance, I think this is a B or a C. And we know that because through moderation, 95% of grades get confirmed. It doesn't matter where you are in South Australia, the Northern Territory, or indeed in SACE International program, teachers are good at looking at the that standard and looking at a piece of evidence from a student against that standard. For progression, you've got that description, and what we're looking for, of course, is to be tight on the principle and flexible on how the principle is met, flexible on what the evidence might be against that progression. So again, certainly a work in progress, working with colleagues nationally, the Assessment Research Centre, Melbourne University, for how we might deal with that. Miriam asked a question about, she's saying if there's no definition of agency and it's not written into subject design, how can we ensure teachers know how to develop it through their interactions with students? Miriam, that's a great point, right? And of course, the starting position is that those 6 elements of Thrive are actually the elements that inform the SACE board and our work. We want to make sure that there are opportunities to develop those 6 elements. And in fact, it's a bit more than that, that we are driving those 6 elements, that we are enabling those 6 elements to really be expressed in schools. And so it doesn't matter which of the 6 elements it is, of course, the way in which they will be enacted is through the subject design, the curriculum, the kinds of assessments. What we're assessing might shift a little bit, and of course we'll signal that to teachers, work with you to make sure that you can support your students to be successful. So from our point of view, the idea of agency has to be embedded in all of our work, and so agency, that core idea of agency will need to be there, but the way that it is expressed might be a little bit different in assessment, or maybe even a bit different in this subject compared to that subject. But the subject matter experts at the SACE board, teachers who are working with us on defining curriculum, say, when they're working together, those 6 elements are going to be some guiding principles. So the expression of those elements will be clear in individual subject design, in the way that we work with you around developing assessment, and so on. So it's not to say this is the definition and students have to meet that definition. We want to work with you to say, well, how does this definition, this idea of agency, how does this characterization of agency, our common understanding of agency, how should that be expressed through this subject or through this assessment? And we want to make sure that for the range of students that we've got in South Australia and the Northern Territory, that idea of agency is flexible enough that teachers feel enabled rather than having to do something that's not appropriate for their students. Gemma asked a similar question, actually. Gemma, you asked a question about, if we've got these 6 elements of Thrive, are they going to replace the current capabilities? No, so as I've kind of just said in response to Miriam's question, those 6 elements are to guide the SACE board. And of course, when we're thinking about what the capabilities might be, and they might be similar to the Australian curriculum capabilities, probably try and make them a little bit more flexible than the Australian curriculum capabilities. But whatever those capabilities end up being defined as, those capabilities will be the way in which students might show us how they have agency, how they have aspects of lifelong learning, how they can transfer their learning. but it won't be agency in itself. Agency drives what we're trying to achieve in students, but we're not trying to teach them agency. So through the curriculum and the guidance that we'll provide, through the capabilities and the guidance that we'll provide there, our intent is that students will develop agency, that students will develop that sense of belonging. But we want to be able to enable teachers to do it in their way rather than do it in our way. And so the 6 elements are for the SACE board and for our education story in South Australia and the Northern Territory. For the interaction between teachers and students, that will be contained within the curriculum, the assessment, the capabilities, and so on. And finally, Trish asked about some subjects that seem very content-driven. How do we help learners map learning to fit their pathway when content is so essential in some subjects? Trish, I think you've kind of picked the constant challenge for us, haven't you, in education, whether that's from a kind of policy point of view or through to curriculum, through to teaching, pedagogy, the whole system and how it all works. Disciplines are important. We need our students to understand disciplines, and that includes some content. Yes, we want them to be able to think as scientists, think as historians. You know, the National Chief Scientist of Australia recently was talking about, you know, we should start teaching students so much stuff in mathematics and get them to ask questions. You know, the real challenge there about kind of both sides, that you need to know some stuff, but you also need to think as a mathematician or a historian or whatever it might be, as I said. I think that includes our vocational education as well. It's not just the competency that you learn, it's you're learning how to think as a electrician or think as someone who works in cybersecurity and that problem solving that's needed in that way. You know, you're thinking as that profession, that discipline really matters. And so we've got that constant balance between the two, when we're trying to give enough flexibility that students can find their own balance in that. Some students are going to want to be very discipline focused, and that's understandable, and of course is fine. Other students might not need so much strong discipline knowledge, but they're going to need other ways of thinking, other knowledge sets, including vocational education, and we're looking for that flexibility across the board. And so within subjects then, if you think about the discipline, you know, it's been really interesting to look at the universities and what they call their threshold learning outcomes. And every faculty across Australia has kind of got together, all the lawyers got together, all the humanities people got together, or all the scientists got together and said, you know, what is it to learn this subject, this discipline, this area at university? And they were all so very similar. They almost all said, you know, you need to learn some content, you need to know how to think like a lawyer, historian, scientist, but you also need communication. You need to be able to communicate your ideas. You need to be able to influence people. You need to help other people develop their understanding. You need to be able to collaborate with others. You need to be able to, and they went down the list, and it would be a familiar list to us. And so even the people who are, you might think as being the kind of almost kind of the custodians of the disciplines, they're saying, you know, it's not just content and skills. There's much more to it than that, and we're all struggling with that balance. I think that balance changes over time. I think it changes for different kids. I think it changes for different contexts. You know, COVID has changed our context a little bit. In terms of, it's changed our context a lot in terms of the experience of education, but we're starting to see now it change our context in terms of policy and what education is for in a world that looks like it does today. So we're constantly grappling with that balance, I think, Trish. I hope that's answered your questions. It was great to be part of the webinar and Educators SA, and of course the associations that are part of Educators SA, these kinds of conversations that we've been having, those associations are having the conversations all of the time. So please do keep those conversations going within your associations, within the profession, and of course with me and with us at the SACE board. Thanks very much.